Recently, somebody asked me, what happens when the fog clears and you realize how much disrespect you have accepted because you wanted love? And that hit me really hard because typically there's two ways this can happen. One is that you've never, ever, ever accepted disrespect in the past, and some person suddenly in your later years or at a more, we'll say, mature time in your life, it happens. You realize you've done this to yourself. And oh, it's so devastating because you don't even know how to deal with it. And it's so new and it's embarrassing and there's all this shame. But that's more rare than what actually happens. What usually happens for someone to allow something like that to happen in their life, it's tied to a pattern. And that's my case. And I know a lot of people that I've worked with, that's the case for them. They try everything they can, in every way they can, to give everyone in their life what they want. And they allow things that they know are wrong, and they know the other person knows is wrong. But they just do it anyways because they're not going to speak up, and the person also knows they're not going to speak up. That's where I've been my whole life. And when it finally clears for people like us who have done it forever, it's a very hollow feeling because you start to ask yourself, who was ever really there for me? Who really loved me? Who really cared? Sometimes it's just trauma bonding, attachment wounds that can make toxicity feel like affection, where we'll sit in something that shouldn't feel good, and yet there's something there. And that's because we are physical beings, we are physiological. That means that there are things happening, there are chemicals in our body that guide our emotional responses in life, and dopamine is a real thing, and how we get dopamine is not discussed enough, especially in the spiritual space, but even in the psychological spaces where we should be discussing base level human needs and how those things are manipulated, how we get them confused, but we don't really talk about that kind of stuff. And so between that and the emotional highs that we can experience with someone who breadcrumbs us and then love bombs, and it's like, oh, I knew it, you loved me, and wow, this is amazing, and oh, that stuff can just mask the red flags, and that's a neurochemical illusion. Illusions are not just like black magic and spells and all these things that in the spiritual community is like the only stuff we think about. Sometimes our brain is actively participating in something that is going against us. People pleasing, that's a survival strategy. A lot of people get that from childhood. It's built in. And I think that spiritual teachings sometimes frame suffering as growth, or certain concepts about love or partnership or relationships can be deemed especially toxic because it's like struggle love, right? And things like that can delay us leaving disrespectful situations. So we've reached this point for some reason, whether you're here now and you're figuring it out, or you've kind of gotten the hang of it recently, or even you've been doing it for a little while and it still feels unfamiliar. It's just, we get that accepting disrespect is never love. Because it's not even showing love to the other person, but it's definitely not loving ourselves. It's self-neglect in disguise. That's why people who get wrapped up in those kind of relationships, self-love is so far from their mind, because what they're doing is active self-neglect. And those masks, those neurochemical illusions where our brain is sparked just enough to keep us going, that stuff is never enough. It's not sustainable. And in the long run, the fog will clear. One way or the other, the fog will clear. And I think at that point, whenever that is for you, if you're where I am, where I went through a lot of healing and trauma stuff, like fixing things for a few years, and now I actually have to sit with my reality and that I don't know how to be normal because of what I've allowed. That I have to learn to be new, to react in new ways, to frame relationships in new ways. There's a lot. But it's self-love for me to make it worth the effort, to pursue a point in the future that I know I will feel better about all of this. I will feel better about how I love and how I let people into my life and how they love me. So when the fog clears, you accept it. You don't beat yourself up. You've probably been doing that for a while, Don't bother. You're just going to go right back into the old cycle. Accept it. Look around and get used to your new normal. Good luck. Love you.